and welcome to the STRIcast. My name is Oliver Coultus and I'm joined by Group Principal Scientist Dr. Christian Spring. Today we'll be going over the use of pesticides in the UK and Europe in sport, what research STRI have done into this topic, and rounding off with the advantages of integrated turf management. So jumping into it then, what have been the trends with pesticide use in sport over the last few years?
In sport, we've been looking continually at a process of reducing our use of plant protection products or pesticides. There has been a downward trajectory in the quantities and the volumes that we're using. There have been multiple drivers for this, some of which we'll touch on later with integrated management. There is also an element of legislative or regulatory impact. I'll talk about that in a second. But also I think there is very much an awakening and a wanting to reduce the inputs of synthetic chemical products, trying to work in hand with nature and the landscape within which sport surfaces sit. So I think there has been an overall trajectory of reduction of use of plant protection products. There have recently, over recent years, been some significant drivers for change. Legislation and regulation has been one of them. We have had the Sustainable Use Directive, which was the first piece of EU legislation, which really outlined how we should be going about using and reducing our use of pesticides and using them effectively, sustainably. And it was the first piece of legislation to really name and introduce integrated pest management, we often call it integrated turf management, as a key strategy that we should be employing. Now, we have, those that have been keeping their eye on the news will have seen what's been going on in terms of debates in the EU about pesticide usage, plant protection product usage, regarding the sustainable use regulation. And I think that has been quite a bit of a driver for change for what we've been talking about in our industry and sort of crystallising our ideas, with the sustainable use regulation really allowing the EU, or was put forward as a tool to help meet their strategic objectives of reducing pesticide usage across the EU by 50%. And one of the parts of the sustainable use regulation was really focusing on amenity sector, and because where we apply and what we apply and often how we're applying it in and around perhaps circumstances where we have a variety of users using the surfaces, but also in an amenity context in around schools and hospitals and other areas like that, which are sort of quite sensitive areas. So that was really the sustainable use regulation was saying, okay, we've had a slightly perhaps patchy uptake of the Sustainable Use Directive, where we've tried to direct people towards best practice. We now feel that we need to have a little bit more teeth to the regulation and actually direct people, not just direct people, but actually push people. And so there was a potential for a significant reduction in the availability of plant protection products for amenity in sport. And that was the context really over recent times.
So what does the current situation look like in both Europe and the UK?
So as it currently stands, the Sustainable Use Regulation was put to a debate in the European Parliament. That was defeated, and so the Sustainable Use Regulation is not coming onto the statute books in a European level. So plant protection products can still be used at a European level, albeit we have to always understand that each member state within the EU has national sovereignty, so which is exactly the situation it was before the Sustainable Use Regulation, and you have member states allowing or dictating what their national legislation is. As long as it meets the minimum standard, which is European regulations and directives, member states can be more extreme. They can go further than those regulations, and that's what we'll continue to see. Some European countries will keep progressing down to whether it's a zero pesticide, whether it's a significant reduction, a massive reduction in plant protection product usage across the board, not just in sport but across the board. Others may not follow that trend. What the Sustainable Use Regulation was trying to do was to get that change to happen. So what does it mean in Europe? Well, very much it's business as usual, but that we need to really redouble our efforts at talking about IPM, integrating IPM or integrated turf management to what we do. We should think about this as a bit of a wake-up call, that we need to come together. We need to make sure that we have clear evidence, that we actually understand what we are doing as an industry. We're talking about sports, whether it's golf, football, horse racing, whatever it may be. That we have clear metrics, that we can demonstrate what the good work that we actually are doing. And there's been a huge amount of good work done, but often it's not necessarily recorded, it's not necessarily have a metric associated with it, which then makes it difficult to use in a quantitative way to help reinforce the good practice that we're already doing. So in Europe, it will very much a business as usual. In the UK, obviously the UK is not part of the EU. However, what happens across the English Channel and the Irish Sea very much impacts the UK, because whether we like it or not, the UK is still part of this European bloc market. So market forces and what will happen in the EU will have an impact in the UK. So the UK, we self-govern, we are able to do enact our own laws and have our own legislation. So whilst it may not have directly impacted us in terms of the legal context or the regulatory context, there would have been an impact just commercially, industrially, as to what was being available. So the current situation across is really, for me, to sum it up, is a bit of a call to arms to make sure that we really focus on what we do, why we do it, how we do it, because regulatory pressure doesn't go away. It's been put on the agenda even further. We need to keep it on that agenda as sport, as an amenity sector, and really say, put our hand up and say, look, we have the capability to do a huge amount, and we want to, as our social and ethical and sustainability responsibility, to do something, so we should do. And it's hopefully is an opportunity for us to galvanise what we're going to do.
And at STRI, we obviously do a lot of research. Can you talk about some of the things that we did that went into this?
Absolutely. So when the sustainable use regulation was put forward, the proposal was put forward, and we understood what the implications were, sport took a look at that, and sport would be one of those industries most heavily affected, because initially there was going to be a more or less withdrawal of plant protection product usage. Then there was some movement on low risk products, biologicals. What we did as sport, really piloted by the European Golf Association and UEFA, was to say, look, okay, as sport, we want to put forward our case to you, the European Commission, about what it is we actually do. How do we use these products? We want to have a science-driven, science-led debate and discussion. So the EGA and UEFA came to STRI and said, look, you guys are experts in this field. Could you put together or drive a impact assessment on behalf of sport? And so for a good part of this year, we've been working on a whole multifaceted approach to pulling together what existing evidence base there is for how we use plant protection products, focusing on the quantitative, engaging with stakeholders, whether that's individual sports facilities, national associations, representative bodies of sport, looking at the literature, looking at the information that's out there, engaging with industry to look at solutions that are coming through. Ultimately taking all these threads and say, here is what we are doing as sport, to be able to demonstrate, and that was one of the most heartening things of being involved in the process, was to look and see at the efforts and the hard work that's been put in to promote integrated management, to think how we can use plant protection products as a tool, but sustainably within how we approach managing sometimes what can be quite a challenging environment, whether you're on a golf course that has a high number of rounds per year, whether you're managing turf in that crucible of a stadium bowl, which is a completely artificial environment, and then we're supporting plant life as in every way we can do. It's pulling all that information together, presenting that in a coherent way that policymakers can read it and understand that it's not just jargon, it's not just science babble. There is data behind it. There is a reason, logical argument for what we do and why we do it. And to also say within that, that if we're going to go down the line of quite significant reductions in plant protection products, we were thinking at one point about not having any solutions available to us, is to also say to regulators, whether that's in the European Parliament or to anywhere really, any member state, to say, if we're going to go down this line, and there are some good examples of perhaps the way to approach it in the EU from countries like Denmark and the Netherlands and France, through to some other countries where it's been a little more turn the tap off, or it's been a very rapid change very quickly, and we haven't really allowed the turf or the sports facilities to really adapt to that new environment. We've been able to put forward perhaps a roadmap of what that might look like, but also what support would be needed to achieve that. And I think one of the key messages that came out of this for me is that sport is proactive. We do want to move down this line, and there's a lot of evidence and a lot of work being put into this, because there's not just a legislative framework. There is also commercial drivers of change. There are drivers of change with cost of living and the price that everything costs in terms of paying staff the wage they need, but that raises overheads, thinking about cost of solutions and products. All of these things factor in, and then when you start factoring other global drivers of change like climate change and what that might bring in store for in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, all of these things layer up. And it's trying to stare into the crystal ball and figure it out. And that's part of what the impact assessment was doing, was to sort of take what we know, look at what could happen, look at how we could approach that, and really wanting to work in a way which was collaborative with legislators. So we're not digging a line in the sand in a trench. It's very much, look, here's where we are and here's what we're doing. We kind of, you're preaching to the converted. We're on this pathway. But help support us to get to the point where we don't need to use these solutions, or need to use them a lot less, because we've got other options, other opportunities, other technologies, other ways of doing what we need to do to produce those sport surfaces.
And I think a nice way to round this mini-sode off would be just how important is integrated turf management?
I mean, it's vital. It is, for me. You write down integrated turf management, and on the other side of the equation you put equals greenkeeping, grounds maintenance. They are interconnected, they are the same thing. If we approach truly how we prepare and manage the landscape of a golf course or a football facility, if we're not doing it in an integrated way, we're not being effective, efficient, or sustainable, both in the truest sense of sustainability from a financial, environmental, as well as a sort of ethical way of approaching how we're producing sports surfaces. You can't do it without thinking about why we have problems, addressing the root cause of problems, and logically it makes sense. If you've got a sniffle, I can have a tissue and I can blow my nose, and that solves a problem for that moment. But if I figured out why I got the sniffle in the first place and stopped myself from getting it, that's a far better solution. So I think that thinking about how we promote the forward proactive thinking about what we do and the impact that we have when we're preparing sports surfaces is vital. So for me, it is inextricably linked into the DNA of what we've done. We kind of know that as sports turf managers. The first ever paper written about integrated pest management or integrated turf management was, gee, this is not a new idea. We've been doing this for decades. It's just what we would call traditional best practice management. And I think that really sums it up. We're already there. We just need to make sure that we follow what we need to, that we adapt to the dynamic situation of the world around us, and we achieve the best possible result by thinking critically about what we do.
Well, thanks for joining me, Christian. I look forward to talking more in the new year.
Thank you very much. Look forward to that.